Hi everybody, I'm Frank Novak here on the road at the car show at the Newburyport Community Senior Center, and it's a wonderful day and we've got a lot of great cars to take a look at of all different classes and styles, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. What we have here is a 1930 Ford. Came back from a Model T. The Model T evolved into a Model A. This is a great car for its simplicity and its affordability and its longevity. They built a ton of these cars over the years and people still covet them for their simplicity and reliability. Fact is, if you take a look at this, if you had a hard time starting the car, can't do this today, but if you take a look at this slot right here, that slot, if you open that up and you had a crank, you turn that over and the whole engine would turn over, and that's one way you could start the car. That was ahead of jumper cables, which they didn't have back in the day. But now you come back here to take a look at this, and where would you fill the tank for a car of this type? You'd think you'd go to the back of the car, right? Not here, because the gas tank would be right here. That's where you'd go ahead and fill that. Not necessarily where you're going to find that today, but you come back here a little bit more, past these wire wheels, and you see what we've got here is a two-seater and the standard transmission, and then you've got a rumble seat in the back. The finish on this car is terrific. It's a nice blue with two-tone with the pinstriping. And then you take a look at these steps. One here and one here. And those were the steps to be able to have somebody step up on this and to step in here into the rumble seat so that you wouldn't mar the finish of the car. Story goes that this is what you'd use for your mother-in-law if you wanted to take her for a ride. And once you take her for one ride, that would be the only ride she'd ever want to go on, because she wouldn't want to negotiate these anymore. We're going to shift gears right now. Did I actually say that in a car show? Forgive me. But what we've got here is a very rare type of a car. It's a tribute car for a Trans Am, a 1969 Pontiac Trans Am. Now, 1969, when people talked about pony cars in General Motors, typically you thought of something like a Camaro. Okay, that's the first thing that comes to mind, or a Camaro Z28. This is the counter version to the Z28, and that's the Trans Am with a 400 cubic inch engine in a smaller body. The power to weight ratio meant that this car would go wherever you wanted to point it really, really fast. You take a look at the type of the front bumper over here. Eventually, these cars evolved into what would be called the Enduro bumpers. And in fact, Pontiac division had a special commercial where they would have a person take a sledgehammer and slam it into the front of one of the Pontiac products that didn't have chrome but had the Enduro type of front bumper, and the hammer would hit it and bounce back without there being any problems at all. That was during a period of time when they were starting to evolve into 5-mile-an-hour bumpers that would make sure that the car would not be dented if it bumped into somebody. This is symbolic of a Pontiac all the way around. They utilize these for not only the Firebirds, they also utilize them for the Tempest, which evolved into the GTO, and ultimately into the Granville, which was the granddaddy of them all, and the big Pontiac Bonnevilles. But beautiful lines, and the traditional colors for when the Trans Am first came out was this white with a blue stripe. A lot of people figure when they think of Trans Ams, they think of the Trans Ams from perhaps the movies like Smokey and the Bandit, but they happen to come on before that time. And in fact, you're looking here at something where you had the eagle on the front of the hood. This one doesn't have that. They came on later versions of what came after this 1969. But this is a beautiful example as a tribute car for the Pontiac Trans Am, and one of the first that evolved from that time period. Attributed to as a workhorse of the country, we've got Ford pickup trucks, and here's a wonderful example of that, albeit slightly modified. This is a 1952? 1953 Ford F100, a workhorse as they go, but we'll take a look at this and see that it's been modified from what it may have been originally. And what we've got here is a 327. This is a 327 Chevy block engine. Now, what is this doing in a 1953 Ford? Well, this Ford has evolved itself into hot rod status. Why? Because we also have here rally wheels, which are typically what you'd find on police cars with these types of hubcaps, which were General Motors cars, and these same types of rally wheels you'd find on Chevelles, Camaros, and even Corvettes. But you take a look, this hood is designed in such a way so that the entire front of the car lifts forward so you have easy accessibility to the engine. And that means that this is probably not metal, but is also going to be fiberglass for ease of use. You come back to the cab, and you take a look. This cab's been modified, but you see it's maintained its original type of stance as far as the gauges and where they go. The steering wheel may have been shortened in diameter, and you do have an adjustment for the steering wheel. These are comfort items that were aftermarket, that were not part of the original, but you take a look at this, and this was a work truck with the step up on the floorboard, the running boards, and into the back. These are very, very coveted trucks and highly, highly sought after. And this, while it may look like a stock 1953 truck from maybe 50 or 100 feet away, when you get up closer, you realize it's been hot rodded, and in a great way. One of the last times this body style appeared was in 1997 for this Jaguar XJ6. This is a 4-liter 6-cylinder engine, and the classic style applied to this car are the humps over the headlights and this wonderful hood with the Jaguar there. Okay, this car coming back is very, very long. Now, this is a standard Jaguar XJ6. They also had an elongated version, an L series, with even longer doors than these, and you also had a Vandenplas ultra luxury series. Even though this is not a Vandenplas, it does have a lot of those same luxury issues here. This is a 4-liter 6-cylinder engine. You wonder, how does that 6-cylinder carry this behemoth of a car? Now, this is a full-size Jaguar. By today's standards, this is probably 30% longer than the largest car you'd find on retail sale today. The fact is, alloy wheels, the energy-absorbing bumpers front and back, and if Ryan will just take a quick look through here, you take a look in the back seat. That back seat is huge. It's huge. Too bad they don't build that type of car anymore, but it's nice to have this piece of history well preserved. Jaguar XJ6. And this comes from the same family that gave you the Jaguar XKE. Okay, from that same family of cars. And it's nice to see that tradition maintained. In 1950, Ford Motor Company decided to take a drastic turn as far as their styling was concerned. In 1949, any of those car aficionados would remember that Ford had the teardrop type of headlights before that in the 1940 Ford. This is 1950. 1950 made a radical departure. It did not have the fenders, the running boards, any of that type. It became a streamlined body. Some add-ons that did not come from the factory, we'll see, are these lake pipes. They're called lake pipes, where the exhaust would come through and filter out from this area. Oftentimes they were great for just looks, and they didn't really function, but great, they look great. You might think that this car is a Bugatti or something of that vintage, but it is not. It is not an actual replica of another car, but you can see from the body styling of this, could it be something like a Bugatti or something of that type? You might think it falls into that class, but this car was one of 20 built in 1981. It is on Corvette running gear and frame, and you take a look at this body style. It was hand built. It's called a Berliner Coupe by Philips. One of 20 that happened to be built, and this car happened to be restored. The interesting thing, if Ryan might be able to take a look at that, you see how classic these designs look, as if it were from the 30s or 40s as a sports car. But then when you take a look on the inside, it says it looks like a Mercedes-Benz as well, but the inside of this car, if you might not be able to get a greater view of it, is actually a Corvette-style interior. and that's because that is what this car is built on, that frame. But it's a wonderful example of a car of that era, but with modern running gear. So classic in two ways, very limited edition, paying homage to that type of era, but with modern running gear. 1931 Ford, or you would think it's a 1931 Ford replica that's been hopped up, so that puts it in hot rod status. Why would I say this? Well, back in 1931, I don't think you'd find this type of an engine block in here, which is a high-performance engine block, but also you'd see that this is a fiberglass body. You take a look at the type of torque thrust chrome wheels that we happen to have here, and even on the running boards that we happen to have. So it's a nice example of a 1931 Phaeton, but it is a replica. And if you take a look on the inside, it can seat two very comfortably, maybe even four. If you go to the back, the running boards are typical for this era, and it's got a lot of power, it's got a lot of style. And here I'll show you one thing. This is something you probably would normally know. Well, where are we right now? At the back of the 1931 Ford Phaeton replica, and here is the trunk. It's a real trunk, okay? You may think you have this in a car, but that's how they decided to call it, because in the beginning, they actually had actual trunks that you could take off and put onto the back of the car. And that's how the name got started, and that's how it stuck. A 1931 Ford Phaeton replica. The year is 1964. The car is Chevrolet Motor Division. The car model is a Chevrolet Corvair. This is a top-of-the-line model because it's the Monza style. The Monza has the 4-speed transmission and a higher performance engine. The interesting thing about this car is that this was launched in order to give competition to the Ford Falcon that Ford was producing as an economical get-around car. The difference was that the trunk on this car was not in the back toward the rear of the car, but was in the front. And what they did was they took a lesson from Volkswagen and put the engine in the back to give it greater traction and stability. One of the things having to do with stability on this car was when Ralph Nader wrote a book, Unsafe at Any Speed, which basically killed the Corvair, and they discontinued it, I think, after it was like 1967 or so, because Ralph Nader said that if you had a hard turn or hit a bump, the wheels could have a tendency to turn in. Maybe they did make the corrections, but the damage was done and they discontinued the Corvair. Doesn't mean it wasn't a landmark car in many other instances, not only because of the innovativeness of General Motors to do that for a car of this type. You had plenty of seating, bucket seats in the front, you had enough seating in the rear, probably more so than the initial Mustangs that they happen to have. But also in the air-cooled engine that you had back here. This was ahead of its time, and in many cases people know the name of Porsche 911. And if you know Porsche 911, there are many things that the Porsche 911 took a cue from this type of an engine, and they still continue to do so. But a 1964 Corvair Chevrolet, still a great example, and it's nice to see that type of history preserved here. Have you ever gone shopping and coming out of the shopping center and wondering to yourself, where did I park my car? Well, you won't have to say that, because, honey, I can spot my car anywhere if it were this color. And this is a bright neon yellow in this well-preserved, nicely restored 1968 International Harvester pickup truck, model 1100. These are very, very rare, because when people think of pickup trucks, they think of the big three. They think of Dodge, they think of Ford, they think of Chevrolet. Okay? Now, something else that happened to come into play now since that time is the Toyota Tundra, and then you have the Nissan-style Pathfinder and their version of that pickup truck too. But this is a great example, because you see what this is. This is an International Harvester truck. They don't make these anymore, and I think it's because they were overtaken by the big three. But they were a very, very tough truck. And the thing is, when you take a look at this, International Harvester, they make a lot of the big, heavy-duty farm equipment. And people may not realize this, but if I'm not mistaken, when you see those yellow-style lawn tractors that are called the Cub Cadets, the Cub Cadets are manufactured by International Harvester. So that's where you get that color combination. If you take a look at the bed of this truck, which is absolutely huge, it was typical that when you bought a basic truck, you got this type of a bed, this long bed. Nowadays, you can't get this long bed unless you pay extra for it in a brand new truck. It's nice to see something that's as utilitarian and as well preserved as this International Harvester 1968 pickup truck. Here we are at a Triumph 1974 TR6. This is a typical British sports car that you have here. Typical in that this is very, very coveted. There were the Triumph TR6s and there was also the MGBs and MGAs. Now, both of those cars are highly coveted. In fact, anybody that knows the Mazda Miata ought to know that that car was modeled and they tried to capture the type of vibrancy and excitement that the MGBs and the TR6s were able to promote during that period of time. And they did it. But here's where it all emanated from. This is an inline 6 that you happen to have here, and it's a TR6. Triumph had this evolve into a TR7, which was a wedge-style car, but it never really caught on, and these cars are the ones that are also highly coveted. This one is a convertible, but it has a hardtop. The curious thing about this is that in many cases, sports cars that have hardtops, like the Corvette, like the older Thunderbirds, the baby birds from 55, 56, and 57, they had hardtops as well, but their hardtops were fiberglass. This is steel. Okay, so when they take this off, they've got to be very, very careful that they don't happen to dent that. You see, this has got the aftermarket racing mirrors. It's got the trim rings on the type of tires that you happen to have here, which are the standard stock. But the interesting thing is, on this type of a car, you had to be careful because when you hit a hard corner, these trim rings sometimes had a tendency to fall off. I've seen it happen. You come back here, you see the luggage rack back here, and that's very functional. And actually, for a British sports car, it's rather large. And British, how do you know? Take a look at the flag and take a look at the TR6. One of the things that you notice at the front, and if you didn't, you'll also notice it from behind here, and that is in order to make the safety grade in the United States for the 5-mile-an-hour bumpers, Triumph and all the other foreign imports had to add these types of rubber bumpers. If you were to buy this same car in Europe in 1974, it wouldn't have these on there. It would just have the straight chrome because you didn't have to have those. They weren't subject to those American standards. But this one was, and it's still a fine example. You see some patina on this car, but that shows that it's been well cared for, but well driven as well. 1957 Chevrolet, everybody knows that that's iconic. It's an iconic car from the 1950s. Big engine sound, big fins in the back. Well, we've got the granddaddy right here, right now, in a bright red-orange type of color. This has got the V8. This has got the symbolic type of shark fins that are right in the hood instead of right in the middle. It also has a massive front bumper, and this is reminiscent of a lot of the bumpers that you'll see on the Cadillacs in the vintage 1950s as well. But this is a Chevrolet. Truth be told, there was a guy that took these very types of cars and tried to make them a quasi-Cadillac with bigger fins and different markings on it, and people bought into it for a period of time. But when you take a look at this, you won't find anything better than a classic like this. This has got the aftermarket spinners that you happen to have on here, the wide white walls, and this was a bread and butter Chevrolet car, but it's a Bel Air, top of the line. You look on the inside, you've got the bench seat, you've got the Power Glide transmission, great dashboard. There's more chrome on that dashboard than you'll find on whole cars nowadays, and look at the size of that back seat. And as you come back here, you see the big, wide chrome stripe right here coming out. It says Bel Air, which was the top of the line. And look at the size of that fin, okay? This, yes, it has dual exhaust, and it's well preserved as if it were stock coming right out of the factory. One of the things we like to have a lot of fun with is we ask people, geez, where do you think they fill the gas tank on a car like this? You look on this side, well, there's no door. Well, it's not behind the number plate, and there's nothing on this side either, so where would it be? Right here. That's where it opens up, in this spot right here. So I suspect, and I've talked with the fellow that owns this car, he loves to go into a gas station where there's a young person in there, and if you have full service, just ask them, just go ahead and fill it up. Of course, it takes a little while for him to find where to do it. Truth be told, this is the last of this breed and body style in 1957. In 1958, they made a radical design style and upgraded for the first time. Bel Airs were then upgraded. Their next level was called the Impala, and that's where the Impala was born. But the 57 was part of what they called the shoebox series. From 1955, 56, and 57, they all use a certain type of boxed frame, and that's why they call them the shoebox. But this is a great example of a 1957 Chevrolet. 1934 may be the year that this car was originally built, but it didn't look like this when it came out of the factory. This is a 1934 Ford. Why does it look different? Well, it's been hot rodded, but in just the right way. When you build a hot rod, you don't necessarily utilize all the same parts from that factory. You can intermingle them. Some people would call it eclectic when you're dealing with furniture or something of that type. But when you're dealing with a car, you can mix and match. Sometimes people are purists and they don't like it, but in other people, they take the best of what they can get and put it together for a really rocking combination. And that's what we have here, a 1934 Ford Coupe. That's steel, that's not fiberglass, but what we also have is a large, massive, bone crusher Chrysler engine in a Ford. How can that be? That's because this was a big power plant in a lightweight body, where they took off the fenders, they took off the running boards, they chromed everything. So this is a beautiful example of what a hot rod should be. You keep on coming back this way, the doors open not from the back, but from the front. And that's what they call suicide doors. And back in 1961 even, the Lincoln Continentals, if you maybe recall, the big massive four-door convertibles, the doors would open normally from this way, but the back doors would open the same way here. Also, no back fenders here, but a beautiful black body with red rims and hubcaps. Beautiful trunk area. This lifted up, and that's where you had your storage. But a 1934 Ford Coupe, that's a hot rod with a big block Chrysler engine. I'm Frank Novak on the road for the Newburyport Community Media Hub here at this wonderful car show at the Newburyport Community Citizen Center. And it's been a wonderful day. The sky was blue, the sun is out, the cars were great. We had them from all over the place. We have them from Britain, we have them from the United States, we have some replicas, and it's been a treat for me. I hope it has been for you. And until next time, my name is Frank Novak. Thanks very much for watching.